Today's daf we're going to be learning is Gittin daf Yud Gimel. We're going to start with a quick review, actually, to get started of the Mishnah back on Yud Aleph Amud Bet. So we have a case where somebody says, "Tnu get zel ishti or shtar shechur zel avdi," right? Wants to give a get through a messenger or an emancipation document through a messenger to the slave. So the question is, when this messenger gets the document, is it a sealed deal? Is it done or not? So we saw the rabbi's position is that, or let's start with Rabbi Meir because he starts on the Mishnah. If he wants to change his mind about both, he can. Why is that? Because for neither of them is this a good thing. For the woman, it's not a good thing because she loses her food sustenance, right? The husband's supporting her all this while. A divorce is not going to be good for her. She's going to have to be financially independent. The slave, now the question is, what's the issue with the slave? Why is it a chov? And that's the big conversation. Because theoretically, you'd say he gets his freedom, and the rabbis say, right, that what's the issue? He doesn't lose food, and let's just take the simple Rabbi Meir. Rabbi Meir says also he loses food, okay? Let's just start with assuming Rabbi Meir says that. The master basically supports the slave, and then the slave no longer gets food once he's freed. And then he has to support himself. That's an annoyance, right? That's a chov. As soon as we put it into the language of chov, it's a detriment to them. It's not good for them. Then, ein chavim la'adam ela b'fanav. That means as soon as the messenger gets it, nothing happened yet. Because the messenger can't acquire something on someone's behalf that's bad for them, right? If it's bad for them, if they don't know about it, how could someone do something bad for me if I don't know about it? If it's good for me, then no problem. So come the rabbis and they say, we're going to distinguish between a get and a shtar shechur, an emancipation document. Because really, it's not true what you said. It's not worse for the slave, because even though under normal circumstances, the master feeds the slave and now they're freed, he doesn't. But it's not the giving of the document that changes that all. Why? Because theoretically, if the master wanted to cut off the slave financially while the slave is still working for him, and he would get all the proceeds of the slave, this is what we proved yesterday, then he could say, I'm not feeding you. He could, he had the rights to do that. So therefore, it's not the giving the emancipation document that causes the slave to lose their food supplement, because it could have been lost otherwise. To which Rabbi Meir responds, but there's still something that goes on in that emancipation, which is as soon as the slave is freed, which again, theoretically could happen at the moment that, according to the rabbis, it happens at the moment the messenger gets it, because it's only good for the slave, comes from man and says, no. There's actually something bad for the slave at that point. What is that? That there's a big if the slave was owned by a Kohen, we'll get back to this today, what about if he wasn't? If the slave was owned by a Kohen, now the slave can't eat truma, and before that he could have eaten truma. So now we're going to see an expanded discussion of Rabbi Meir and the rabbis. So let's go back now to your bed and bed at the bottom. We quote this braita, which happens often. The Mishnah usually doesn't even have a discussion between the two opinions. Usually it just gives the two opinions. In our case, we had the Mishnah with a bit of a back and forth, but now we're going to get more back and forth between them because the back and forth wasn't expanded enough. So here in the braita, we're going to get an expanded version. It's actually in the Tosefta, which often happens. The Mishnah has a smaller version and the Tosefta often has a back and forth. Not always, but it does appear more often there, a conversation. So Rabbi Elazar says, we said to the mayor, I said to me and the rabbis, we went to argue against Rabbi Meir. And we said to him, I'm about 12 lines from the bottom of yesterday's stuff. Isn't it a good thing? Now they're free. Amar lanu, we said to us, why? Because if he was owned by a Kohen, he would be disqualified from truma. Amar nulo. It's interesting. They're answering what he didn't really talk about. He was talking about the truma. And they said, but what about the fact that it's not the food that's the issue, because the food he could cut him off from before. Amar lanu, I'll prove to you, because an eved of a Kohen who runs away, or the woman who's married to a Kohen and she runs away, and then they can't give the get, right? Or the shtar shechur can eat truma. But this person who gets freed cannot eat truma. So the woman, it's going to be bad for her because, again, it's the truma and it's the food. So it's a little bit of a not clear conversation, to which the Gemara says, what exactly were they saying? And what were the rabbis saying to them? And what did Rabbi Meir respond? So now we're going to explain it a little bit better. What Rabbi Meir is saying is, Heshivtuni ala mizonot, ma teshivuni ala truma. So I get what you're saying about the mizonot. You're right. Theoretically, it's not really an obligation for the slave because he's getting cut off from food. Because you're right. The rabbis, you said it. If he wanted to cut the food off before he freed him, he could have. So you're right that the freeing itself does not make it worse when it comes to the food. I'll admit that you're right. But what are you going to answer me about truma? And he says the following. Why does he talk about the slave running away and the woman running away? Because what he says is the following. He kind of preempts a question they might say. If you want to say that if he wanted to, he could throw the get at the Eved. And we're going to get to this. As the Leica get, there's a whole chapter called that, which is not that the whole chapter deals with it, but there's all this talk about you can throw a get into the domain of the woman or into the domain of the slave when it comes to the emancipation document. They don't have to accept it. Okay? It just has to be brought into their domain. So if you want to say, he could theoretically, now there's two options here. We were trying to say that when he gives it to the slave, basically that already causes the chov, right? That already makes it worse because he now can't eat truma. Now he says, if you want to try to tell me this isn't the chov, just like the food, he could cut him off from food. He could cut him off from truma. How so? By throwing the get at him. Okay. Well, shabik leva arik va'azal la'am. The slave could just run away. In other words, if you're going to tell me, well, there's a different way to do it without him having to give it to the messenger, he could just throw it at the slave. Basically, he's going to say the following. You might want to try to suggest, well, they could just throw the get at him, but he could run away and not be in the vicinity to get the get thrown at him. So let's say you're an Eved and you want to continue to eat truma and you don't want to get freed. Or you're a woman and you want to continue to eat truma and you don't want to get your get. So you run away and then the husband has no way to give you the get, no way to give you the truma. So while the woman doesn't have to be a willing acceptance, doesn't have to accept the get willingly, but she does have to, the get has to come to her, benatan biadat, has to be given to her in her hand. See what hand can be expanded to mean, but that's not our topic right now. The point is, he has some other way to give it to them, in which case, it's not the shaliach that's doing the act of the chovah, right? In other words, again, they tried to say, or Rabbi Meir was saying, if you try to tell me it's not the shaliach that's doing the causing the detriment to this person because the husband could theoretically throw it at them, it's not true. Because they could run away and then never get it. So theoretically, let's take the slave particularly, because that's our topic, forget the woman. I could be a slave living far away from my master because I've run away from my master. He has no way to free me because I'm not there to receive the document. And I can still eat truma. So if he were to give the document to the slave, to the messenger to free me, that would be bad for me because then I wouldn't be able to eat truma. So there you see, it's a chov. Okay? That's what he's trying to prove. To which the Gemara says, it's actually a pretty good claim. You're right, Rabbi Meir. So why do the rabbis disagree with him about this? So Amar Rava, now we're going to finally understand this last line of the Mishnah. Okay, the Mishnah, at the very end of the Mishnah had said, Amru lo, the last line, the rabbis got the last line in, the final word, mipneshu kinyano. Right, Rabbi Meir said he disqualifies him from eating truma by freeing him. And the rabbis answered, because he's owned by him. What exactly does that mean? So we tried to explain it in some way when we read the Mishnah, but now we're going to understand it in a different way. Rava says, Hainu de kamahadrele b'matnitin mipnei shehu kinyano. He says, this is what the rabbis meant when they said no. It's because he's owned by him. Remember, this is always a hard concept for us. But the slave is considered property of the husband, okay, of the owner. So he's considered property. So what does that have to do with this? How does that answer the question? Well, what was Rabbi Meir's point? Rabbi Meir's point is it's only the emancipation that's going to disqualify him from eating truma, right? If it weren't for the emancipation, the slave could run away. If it weren't for this messenger, basically, the slave could run away and never be freed and always eat truma. So therefore, you can't give it to the messenger and say as soon as the messenger gets it, the slave is free, because it's bad for him, because now he can't eat truma. But comes the rabbis and they say, no, it's not true. There is an alternative. Just like we said, there was an alternative with the food. He could cut off his food supply if he wanted. Without freeing him, he could actually cut off his truma without freeing him. What could he do? Well, if he wanted to, shakil arba'a zuze mi Yisrael, upasali kol hecha de'ita. Let's say my slave runs away, and I'm upset with him, right? And I want to mess him up. So I'm from a family of Kohanim because he belongs to my family, so he can eat truma. If I want to, now he runs away, so I have no way. Now, right now, Rabbi Meir claims the only way to disqualify him from eating truma is to free him. And I don't have a way to do that because he's gone. So basically, I can't give it to a shaliach and assume the shaliach is going to gain rights to his freedom for him, because that would be bad for him, and you can't do something bad when the person doesn't know about it. So basically, I have no way to do it, to disqualify him from eating truma, only through the shaliach, and that makes the shaliach causing detriment. The rabbis want to prove, no, I have a different way to do it, which means that when the shaliach gets the emancipation act, it's not actually bad for him, because I can mess him up some other way, which is I could go to my neighbor who comes from a family of Yisraelim, they're not Kohanim, and I could say, listen, I have this slave who ran away. Can you do me a favor? Can you give me a little bit of money, 4 zuzim, which is nothing? Give me a drop of money, a symbolic, buy the eved off of me. And now I messed up the eved from eating truma, because now the eved is owned by someone who's not a Kohen. And in that way, when the eved runs away, I can mess them up from eating truma by basically selling him to my neighbor for no real money. Okay? Right, exactly. I was thinking about that, the shnei zuzim of the goat in Chag Gadya. So basically, what you have is a way to basically disqualify him from eating truma, which doesn't involve freeing him, which proves the point of the rabbis. Because now let's go back to the words. Because he's your kinyan, he's owned by you, you can actually sell him to someone else. Now, who would buy your slave? Your slave ran away. Nobody wants to have a slave that doesn't exist right now. He's not real. He's not a real slave. So you do like a fictitious deal. It's for almost no money. Why your friend would do it, maybe in the hopes that the slave will come back and they'll actually end up with a slave, right? So it's actually a good deal for them. They pay almost no money, and maybe, right, it's like a stock. Maybe it'll go up. Maybe actually the slave will show up and you'll actually get some. So that resolved that issue, and now we understand the machloka between them and the two sides. Ule Rabbi Meir, but now we have to deal with that last point, which is Tinach Eved Kohen. This disqualifying for truma is only relevant if the master is a Kohen, right? What's the percentage? I don't know what the percentage of Kohanim were in those days, but it's not a huge percentage of cases. So it's only true in cases when it's a Kohen. Eved Yisrael Ma'ikal Ameimar. What are you going to say about a slave of a regular Israelite, who this wouldn't be relevant? And then there is no detriment to the slave by freeing him. Amar Rav Shmuel bar Rav Yitzchak, mipnei shemafsido mishipcha Knaanit. There is a detriment to the slave by freeing. Remember what happens with a slave. A slave, when he's a Canaanite slave in the house of the master, he's allowed to marry and mate with shipcha Knaanit, okay, a Gentile slave woman. Can't marry a Jew at that point, even though he's like a pseudo-Jew. When he's freed, he can't marry shipcha anymore, but he can marry a Jewish woman. So what do they say? It's a detriment to him because he can no longer marry shipcha Knaanit. To which the Gemara says, what are you talking about? Adraba, harei mutibo b'bat chorin. Isn't this better? Because now he can marry a Jewish woman. Isn't that better than a shipcha Knaanit? Okay, prepare yourself for this next line. You're not going to be so happy with it. Take a deep breath. To which they answer, in order to come up with why this is detrimental, and basically, now you have to remember, Rabbi Meir didn't say this. This is trying to understand. Rabbi Meir said the detriment to the slave is the truma issue. But it was a big problem because it doesn't deal with, let's say 90% of the cases. So how does Rabbi Meir resolve that? So the Gemara is trying to figure out what Rabbi Meir was thinking. And they come up, this is what I call a creative answer. It's a little bit of a difficult creative answer. I'm preparing you for this just so that you understand that sometimes they're pushed into a corner and they have to come up with some answer. Doesn't always mean it's true, okay, or that this is the way we really want to look at it. But anyway, they explain, he'd rather, an Eved would rather have someone who's hefker. In other words, he can sleep with Shipcha Knani without any commitment. It's a non-committing type thing. Zilale shchichale pritzale. Okay, she's cheaper. She's found more often. She's there. She's prutza. She's not exactly a refined woman. This is actually better for him. He'd prefer that to a nice Jewish woman. Okay, we're going to leave that because I don't even know how to relate to this, but obviously it's a challenging line. New Mishnah. Ha'omer, Shnu get ze li'ishti, shtar shechur ze la'avdi v'met. Someone who says, give a get to my wife. You have to understand there's two ways to say this. You could say, kitvu, get li'ishti. If you say kitvu, and we're going to talk about this a lot throughout the Masechet, if you say, write a get to my wife, you didn't say give a get. You just said write the get. So we assume you meant write the get, and we don't give the get. We don't assume that meant you're sending a messenger to deliver the get. It doesn't get delivered in that case. But if you say, give a get to my wife, what you mean is take care of getting it written, getting it signed, and getting it given to her. Okay, so the word shnu means give it to her. Shtar shechur zel avdi, give a document to an emancipation document to my slave. Vamet, you made this statement. Now, if you make this statement, we basically act upon it. And like I said, we make sure the get is written, right, both for the woman or for the slave. We give it, all that. But if you died before it was given, lo yitnu la'achar mita. There is no such thing as giving a shtar for you after you die. So we don't give the get, we don't give the emancipation document. Okay, it doesn't work. First of all, you can see why. For the woman, he's already dead. There's no point of a get once he's dead. For the Eved, once he dies, it already passes on an inheritance to his children. And his commandment to release the slave is no longer valid. Okay, now we're going to talk about, Gita, you're asking, even if he's on his deathbed, we're going to have a whole debate about whether this is talking about a person on his deathbed or not on his deathbed, okay? But yes, even on his deathbed, if he dies before the shtar is written, we do not give it, okay? That's a general rule. This is going to be the main case we're going to deal with today. If you say, give 100, maneh, I think is 100 zuz, if I'm correct, give 100 zuz to this person, and then, 100 dinarim is zuzim. Dinarim and zuzim are the same. Give 100 zuz to this person, and then you die, yitnu la'achar mita. If you say, give this person money, and then you died before the money was given, then you do give the money. So now we're going to have to understand this halakha and why is this. And the first thing we're going to have is Rav limiting this last case in the Mishnah. Amar Rav Yitzchak bar Shmuel bar Marta mishmei de Rav, v'hu shetzvuin umunachim b'keren zavi. Rav is quoted by Rav Shmuel, the son of Marta, Rav Yitzchak, the son of Shmuel, the son of Marta, is quoting Rav saying, this is only if, when you say, give this 100 dinarim to so-and-so, the money was sitting there piled up in the corner of the room, okay? If it wasn't piled up and designated in the corner of a room, it's meaningless. You don't give it after death, okay? So now we're going to have to figure out why this is. And now they start with the question that Gita, you were bringing up. Are we talking about someone on their deathbed who happened to die because they were on their deathbed? Or are we talking about someone who was perfectly healthy and just dropped dead before we dealt with it for whatever reason? Okay, so that's the big debate, and we're going to have two opinions as usual. So first comes the question, what are we talking about? And what we're really trying to do is not just understand the Mishnah, but understand the Mishnah through Rav's lens. Rav said it's only if the money was piled up. It doesn't work if the money wasn't piled up. So, if the person was totally healthy, and then before we gave the gift dropped dead, then kitzvurim I having haylo mashach. Why should it help if it was piled up? There was no kinyan at all. If a person was healthy and said, give this to someone, but they didn't do a kinyan, until you do a kinyan, which is an act of acquisition. There's all different ways you could do it. We'll get to that later on. But okay, we're now going into the world, even though we're in the world of Gittin here, Masechet Gittin, much of Masechet Gittin deals actually with dinei mamonot, monetary law. if I want to give something to you, we make a sale. It's not a sale unless there's an acquisition done. So that means if I made an arrangement with you and then I died, we wouldn't go ahead with it if there was no kinyan. There was no, right? You could call a kinyan, picking up a handkerchief, which is symbolic, something passing hands. Okay, you pull the object. That's what we're talking about. Halo mashach. If I said, here's this gift, I want you to give it to so-and-so. And then let's say here by the way, we learned someone else could moshech. Someone else could do the kinyan and acquire it for you because it's only good for you to get that 100 dinarim. This is zachin la'adam shelo b'fanav. So as long as someone pulled the money, it would be yours. But if nobody pulled the money and I died, it actually passes on inheritance to my children and you can't really claim it from them. So it shouldn't help if they were piled up. It doesn't make a difference. Nobody acquired them. Nobody did any act of acquiring. Shouldn't work. And well, if you're relying on your deathbed, my iriat sfurin. Why do you even need sfurin? Okay, in other words, in the case of a healthy person, sfurin doesn't help. In the case of a shchiv mera, a person on their deathbed, you don't even need the money to be there. How do we know that? Ki ain't sfurin nami. If the money wasn't sitting right there, if I'm lying on my deathbed and I say, I want you to give 1,000 shekels to so-and-so, okay, to you, let's say. So as soon as I say that, we're going to see right now, the words of someone on their deathbed are as if they were written and already passed over. So you don't need any sort of kinyan, and you don't need the money to be right there. It could be money from my bank account you would take. Doesn't matter that the money's sitting in the corner. You don't need that. Because why did they institute this? They instituted this because they didn't want people on their deathbed to get all worked up that they didn't deal with everything, right? You can imagine, right? You're at the end of your life, say, oh, I didn't deal with this, I didn't deal with that, I didn't deal with that. You get very stressed and it might actually induce death quicker. So we want to keep you calm. We want to tell you, don't worry. Whatever you say, it's as if it's a done deal. So just by saying it is enough. I don't need any sort of kinyan and I don't need the money to be physically sitting there. So we're stuck. Doesn't make sense. Doesn't make sense. It's about a healthy person. Doesn't make sense. It's about a dead person, which a person dying. So basically, doesn't make sense at all. Why did Rav say it has to be piled up? Again, the mission itself could make sense. You could easily say this was a shchiv meira, was a person dying, and as soon as they say give this, it's as if it was given. But Rav coming and saying it's only if the money was piled up doesn't make any sense. So now we're going to have Rav Zevid and Rav Papa, and then we're going to basically say this is what Rav Zevid says. Each of them is going to quote a different statement of Rav and connect it with this. And then we're going to have to say, why does each one not hold by the other? And that's going to be most of our daf for today. Amar Rav Zevid, la'olam bibari. It's actually a healthy person. According to Rav Zevid, we're talking about a healthy person. And just like Rav Huna says, in the name of Rav, da'amar Rav Huna amar Rav, mana li biyadcha, tinehu lo leploni, b'mahamad shloshtan kana. If, let's say, you lent me money, and then you come and you say, or let's do it with we'll start with an object. Let's say you gave me your phone to watch. And then you say, okay, I mean, the truth is they're talking about money, so let's keep it with money. You come and you say to me, listen, you borrowed 100 zuzim from me. The money right now that's in your hands that you're supposed to return to me, don't return to me. Give it to my friend. Okay, probably I owe her money. Give it straight to her. You owe her money. So, mana li biyadcha, if you say the words, you have 100 shekel of mine in your hands, okay, that's what you say to me. Tinehu lo leploni, give it to my friend. B'ma'amad shloshtan kana. If you make that statement, and all three of us are in the room, you, me, and your friend, that friend already acquires that 100 shekel. Okay, it's as if they're hers. So now, this would be the same thing. If you say, now you would have to say the Mishnah is talking about a case of, now it seems like this would have to be number one, that the 100 shekel was there, okay? So now this explains our case. Someone's sitting there, they're healthy, perfectly healthy. They say, give this gift to so-and-so. So there's three people. There's the messenger, who you're saying give the gift, and there's the third person. And you say, make sure to give this gift to so-and-so. And then you would have to say that what Rav is discussing here, the way Rav reads the Mishnah is three people are in the room and the money's in the room. And therefore, even though the third person that I was, let's say it was me, I was giving this money to through the messenger, That third person didn't lift anything, didn't do any sort of act of acquiring, but because all three of us are in the room, Rav says that's enough, that it's as if that person acquired it. And that's why if I then drop dead on the floor before they actually touch the money is theirs. Okay? That's what Rav Zevid says. Rav Papa, soon we'll get to why did Rav Papa hold this way. What's the problem with this argument? Rav Papa Amar, La'olam b'shchivim. No, it's talking about somebody who's on their deathbed. Uchi'id after Rav, and according to a different statement of Rav, and as we said, I said they're each going to rely on Rav. Da'amar Rav, shchiv mera, sha'amar tnu maneh leploni minechasai, maneh zen yotnim, maneh stam ein yotnim. Even though we said that when a shchiv mera says, give this to so-and-so, right, it's as if it was a done deal. That's only if they said, give this money. But if they said, give money, 100 shekels, or 100 zuzim, which is unspecified money, like you didn't say where the 100 zuzim are, then ein notnim. This is a very interesting halacha. Chayshinan shema maneh kavor kama. Now, in those days, people didn't have bank accounts, right? So basically, people had money. We don't know where they were keeping their money, right? Maybe under their mattresses, maybe buried in the ground under their house, wherever they had their money. Now, if you just say, give them 100 dinarim, we don't know what money you're referring to. Maybe, right? So now the heirs are going to come and take all the money. You can't claim it from that money because maybe he meant money he had hidden out in some field somewhere. Maybe he meant a particular 100 shekels from somewhere else, and you can't take it from the heirs right now because you don't know what money he was talking about. Maybe he had something buried somewhere, and that's what he was referring to. So basically what it's saying is what Rav held is, when you're on your deathbed, say, this money that I have in this place, make sure to give it to that person. This money I have in this place, you have to specify. If you don't, it's actually the opposite of what we saw before. We want to just make it easy for you, but here it's actually not going to work unless you're very specific. Now what happens, this does sound a little bit strange, and in fact, the Gemara tells us just so you shouldn't worry, we actually don't hold this way. We're not worried about it. If someone says give 100 shekels, we give 100 shekels of their money, 100 dinarim, we give 100 dinarim, whatever money it is, we give it, and we're not worried. Maybe he's talking about some money buried somewhere. But Rav Papa says, Rav said this, we are worried about it, and therefore, that would explain Rav here. Only if it's if it's in a pile in the room, and the person's on their deathbed, and they say, listen, give this money to so-and-so, then that works, okay? That works only because it's there. So first we thought it should work even if it's not there, but then we see Rav says it only works really if you're talking about specific money. So the way to talk about specific money would be if it's piled up in the corner, right? It could be some other way, but that would be a good way to do it. And that's why Rav says that. So now we're going to have to figure out, so we have two explanations. Either it was a healthy person, and then we explain the tzvurim because it worked because it was all three people were there, and in that way they acquired it, but they're only going to acquire it if it's actually physically in the room. Or else it's because they're on their deathbed, and it only works because it's there, because otherwise we might be concerned about something. He's referring to money that's buried somewhere that we have no idea where that is. So Rav Papa, my time alo amar to Rav Zevid. So now we have to do that back and forth. Why didn't he hold like him? Why didn't he hold like him? So remember, Rav Zevid was the one who said it's a healthy person. And it's based on this line, Mana li biyadcha, t'nei lo leploni. Again, I have money of yours in mine, right? You say, you have money of mine in your hand. You say to me, Michelle, you have money of mine in your hands. Instead of returning it to me, give it to somebody else. And if we're all three in the room, they already acquired the money. And we're assuming right now, because Rav Zevid is explaining Rav, that the money has to be physically there. Now we're going to see where Rav Papa didn't hold like him. So Rav Papa, why didn't he hold like Rav Zevid, turning out a bed? Kasavar Rav Papa, he held that ki amarav, and this is a topic we're going to get back to at the end of the daf, is this, what did Rav really hold about this? There's a debate whether ki amarav lo shna b'milveh v'lo shna b'pikadon. He held that Rav said this could be both for a loan and for a pikadon. What's a pikadon? You give me an object of yours to watch. So now, the obvious case is in a pikadon case. Why? And this is going to be much easier to explain. The Gemara is going to struggle at the end of today's talk to understand the milveh case. But if you gave me your phone to watch, and then you say to me, listen, you have my phone in your hands, give it to someone else, okay? Don't return it to me. I owe a phone to somebody else, give it to them. So now the phone, when it's in my property, is it mine or is it yours? it's clearly yours. So when you say give it to someone else, it's very easy to say that the item already transferred property and it transferred hands to this third person because it was yours. You're giving rights of it to somebody else. But with a loan, it's not so simple. Why? Milvet, as we learn in many sugyot, milvet lahotza anitna, and this is pretty obvious. When you give me money, you don't expect to receive the exact money that you gave me back. You expect it's given to be spent. You give me money, I spend the money, I make other money, I return you different money. So if you come and you say, the 100 shekel, or the $100, let's say, that I loaned you, you say to me, give it to somebody else. Well, it's not like I have $100 sitting there right in front of me. That's your money that you gave me. That's much more difficult to say the third party now acquired that $100 when that $100 is sitting somewhere in my bank. We don't even know what $100 it is. It's on paper, right? It's just that I owe you this money. So what Rav Papa said, now that explained Rav Zevid. Rav Zevid was saying that when Rav said, it must be that the money was physically sitting there. Otherwise, how could you? So you don't have to actually lift the money, but the fact that it's there, we're designating specific money. And since you have rights to collect that money, you have rights to pass it on to somebody else. But if the money is not sitting there, we're just talking about a regular loan, it would seem strange to allow you to pass that on to somebody else. But Rav Papa says, he holds that when Rav said, and we did it while all three of us were there, it even works for a loan, which means it even works if the money's not sitting right there. It doesn't only work for a pile of money that you told me, watch this money, right? Like I'm thinking you go to a hotel and, this happens more, I would say, in places where, let's say there's no safe in the room. So what do? You give it to the owner of the hotel, they package it up, they put it in an envelope, has your name on it, they hold it for you, safekeeping. When you get it, you get the exact money back. That would be a pikadon. That's not a loan. So if it was talking about a pikadon, then we understand the money has to be physically there for this acquiring to work. But if you say it also applies to a halva'ah, a loan, then you don't need the money to be physically there. Because that's the whole nature of a loan. It's not the same money we're talking about. We're just talking about money in theory, right? Money on paper. So if you hold that, then there's no need for tzvur and umunachim. So that's why Rav Papa doesn't explain the Mishnah that way. Papa says, is the Mishnah not, he doesn't think that Rav is talking about a case of a bari who, right, a healthy person who basically said, give this to so-and-so that you can pass it on like that without the money physically being, the money would have to physically be there. He doesn't think the money would have to physically be there. He thinks that Rav would hold the money doesn't have to physically be there, which doesn't make sense. Why Rav said this Mishnah is only if the money is physically there. So again, if you hold the Rav's statement about manali biyadcha, without the money physically being there, because alone it wouldn't physically be there, then you wouldn't need our Mishnah to be in that case. So that's why Rav Papa doesn't understand it that way, and Rav Papa moves to understand it as it was a person on their deathbed, and it's a totally different thing. So now we have to say Rav Zevid, my time alone, Amarke Rav Papa. Why didn't he hold like Rav Papa? Rav Zevid says there's no way our Mishnah is talking about a shchid. Now you have to bear with me. It's going to be like a few things building on a few things. Mimai, from where? How does he know it can't be talking about a shchid? Now this goes back to something I told you before, but we'll read it again inside. Mita katani, from the fact that it says, ha'omer, we're going to specifically talk about the language tenu. It says in the Mishnah, give a get to my wife, give a shtar shikur to my eved, give a gift to so-and-so, right? Tenu gets a lishti, shtar shikur lavdi, umet, right? So you say, give this get to my wife, and then you died. Lo yitnu lachar mita, right? You don't give it after death. That's the simple Mishnah. But what can you infer from this Mishnah? Now, here's why it's complicated. So we're going to make all these inferences. If you say, give this get to my wife, and then you died, doesn't work. Which implies what? If you didn't die, would they give the get? Sure, right? They would give the get. If you didn't die, you said give the get, they would give the get. They would write the get, they would sign, they would get it signed, they would give it. So Tama Demet, Ha Mechayim, if you're still alive, no name, you would give it. Now, what else can we infer from the Mishnah? That specifically they chose the language of Tnu. Why? Tama Damar Tnu. it would sound like halo amar tnu ein notnim. But if you didn't say give it, sounds like you wouldn't give it. Meaning, let's say you just said, write a get for my wife. I told you before, you could say write a get, you could say give a get. Now, from the fact that the Mishnah chose the language give a get, and it doesn't work after death, but it does work when you're still alive, that means only the words give a get would work, which means if you said write a get and the person still was alive, you wouldn't give the get. Now, question is, healthy person on their deathbed. Well, I already told you that if you're on your deathbed and you say kitvu, we actually write the get and give the get. And this Mishnah implies we don't, only if you say tnu. Again, it's all inferences from the Mishnah. But assuming you infer, number one, that this doesn't work after death, but it does work if you're still alive. And then number two, it only applies if you said give and not if you said write, then it can't be talking about a person on their deathbed. Okay? Because the shchiv merah, even if you just said write, we give the get. Now, how do we know this? We're going to prove it now from a Mishnah. Ditna. Barishona. Originally, hayu omrim, hayotze bekolar, someone who's about to be sent to death. Okay, this means like they chained him up and they were bringing him to his death. This is the Gentile way of killing people in those days. So they would take people out in this kolar, in these chains. Ve'amal. So as you're about, you're on death row, you say kitvu get lishti. You say write again. Now we're assuming you're about to be executed. You're pretty worked up. You're not really careful about what you're saying. And you say write again to my wife because you don't want your wife to have to do yibum. You don't have kids. And you want your wife to get out of the mitzvah of yibum or chalitza. So you say, write a get to my wife. Okay, obviously they have to give it to her before he dies, but they're going to quickly write the get and give it, even though he didn't say give the get. Because someone who's about to be executed, okay, right now it's only someone about to be executed, not someone on their deathbed. But that's barishona. Chazru lomal. Eventually, though, they added more people to this list. And they said it's not just someone who's about to be executed, but someone who's about to go on a long journey. Are you ever in someone's house or your own, when you're about to go on a trip and everyone's worked up and everyone's trying to get the last minute things together and it's craziness in the house and people aren't paying attention to what they're saying. So if you're worked up, now in those days, you're going on a long business trip or something, you don't know if you'll come back. There's dangers on the road. It's scary. You're worked up. You say, listen, write a get for my wife. And you didn't say write and give it. They write and give the get. Because again, you're worried, like this is, remember in the time of David, the Midrash says that they all gave gets to their wives before they left to explain the Batsheva, Uriah Hitti story. Anyway, so you're about to go on a long journey and you say, write a get to my wife. We also write it and give it to her. And Rabbi Shimon Shizuri Omer, this is the important line for our purposes, Apa Mesukan, also someone whose life is in danger, meaning someone who's sick and is about to die, and they say kitvu, we give it. So according to Rabbi Shimon Shizuri, right, basically based on that, we're explaining why Rav Zevid didn't say like Rav Papa, right? Because Rav Zevid said you can't explain the case in a shchiv merah because you wouldn't need the words tnu for it to actually be effective if the person was still alive, if they hadn't died yet. So if someone's on their deathbed and says, write a get to my wife, we write it, we give it to her hopefully before he dies, and that would work. And that's what you can infer from the Mishnah. But the Mishnah says, give, not write, which would seem only give, not write. And that's not true. Writing would be enough. To which Rav Ashi says that's not a great proof as to why you didn't hold like Rav Papa, because only Rav Shimon Shizuri said this is the same as true for a person on their deathbed. But maybe the Mishnah holds like the rabbis who don't think so. Okay, so that's an aside. But basically what we did was now, let's just go back to the Mishnah and review. We had this law in the Mishnah that you can't give a document after death, but you can give this gift, right? If you say money. Rav said it's only if the money's piled up. We had two explanations. Why do you need this money piled up? And why is it even, right? Why is it necessary? And what does it do? And why doesn't it work without it? And then basically we had two explanations. Rav Zevid, Rav Papa. Is it a healthy person? And it's ma'amad shloshtan. It works because the money is there, and it wouldn't work if the money wasn't there. Or is it the shchiv merah? And it's because, right, if it wasn't there, you'd have this problem that you'd have to worry about buried money somewhere. And maybe he's not referring to that, and you wouldn't be able to give it, even though we don't hold that way, but that's how Rav Zevid understands this. And right, that's just an added note, probably much later in the Gemara, that by the way, we don't hold this way. Anyway, then we have why doesn't he hold like him, or why doesn't he hold like him? Now we're going to go to Gufa. We're going to go back to the statement of Rav Hunam. And if you remember, Rav Papa, the reason you didn't hold by Rav Zevid is because he said, this works even for a loan. You don't need the money to be sitting there piled up, which means it doesn't make any sense what you said, Rav Zevid, because it doesn't explain why the money's there. So if you remember, he said it works for a halva'ah, not only for a pikadon, not only if you're watching something of someone's, you have some physical item of someone's in your hand, but it also works for a loan where there's no specific money designated. This would still be acquired by that other person. But we don't know really. Rav Papa said it, Rav said it for both. But right now we're going to kind of deliberate about this. So I'm a Rava. Mistabra milte de Rabbi Pikadon. Aval b'milvalo. Rava starts out by saying, it makes a lot more sense that Rava's statement that you can acquire this item, right, by basically someone saying to me, you owe me money, instead of giving it back to me, give it to someone else, and you acquire it, would make a lot more sense if we're talking about only a pikadon, only an item, the physical item that's there. But it wouldn't work for a loan. It doesn't make so much sense it would work for a loan, because how can you acquire something that's on paper, that's just up in the air without doing any formal act of acquisition? But Rava continues and says, V'alokim, which is a language of swearing, but I swear, Amar Rava filu b'milvah. I heard Rav say he even thinks it applies for a loan. Okay, and that matches what Rav Papa said, that it applies for a loan as well. Itmar Nami, it was also said that Amar Shmuel Mishmei de Levi, that not only did Rav say it, but or Rav claims that Rav said it, but Shmuel also said in the name of Levi that Milva li biyadcha t'nei lo leploni b'mamach lo shan kana. That he says also a loan works. Okay, he said it specifically in the language of a loan. Now we have to explain how does this work. So what we're going to have for the rest of the daf, we're almost done, is Ameimar's explanation of how this works and Rav Ashi's difficulty with Ameimar's explanation. Okay, again, a pikadon is very easy to say because you who own this pikadon, who gave it to me to watch, okay, let's say your phone, I have your phone in my hand. You can say, give my phone to so-and-so, and because it's your phone and because the phone is in existence, we can say that ownership is transferred to you. But when we're talking about money, and we don't know what money we're talking about, how can you acquire something without any action, any acquisition? So Amar Ameimar, Naaseh ke'omer lo b'shat matan ma'od. He goes all the way back to the beginning of the loan, and he says, why does this work now? Okay, we're standing now in 2023, and the loan was, let's say, done in 2020, let's say in the year 2000. Okay, let's go all the way back, because we're going to see, I picked this example on purpose. Let's say the loan was done in the year 2000. And now in 2023, you say, instead of it was a long-term loan, I took out a big mortgage, something like that. You say, listen, instead of giving the money back to me, give it to my friend. So how does your friend acquire it? Just by, if we're all three in the room, how does it work? So Ameimar says it's like you said in 2000, when we were standing there in the year 2000, my money is lien to you right now. I'm taking out a loan from you. That means that I'm giving you rights to access that amount of money in my possession. And not only to you, but to anyone, as we say, anyone who has power of attorney for you, or right, anyone who's coming in your place. Again, I didn't say this, but it's as if that at every loan, it's kind of like that. That from the moment of the loan, we have to go back to the moment of the loan, because there has to be some sort of kinyan taking place somewhere. The moment of the loan, I basically said, you have rights to wherever you can find let's say it was $100 in my possession for you or for anyone else who comes in place of you. So that would be how it worked. Again, I want it to be clear. There's a different mechanism used for a pikadon, because a pikadon is an actual object that's yours, much easier, and a different mechanism that's used for a milva. So while Rav says it applies to both, it has to be a different mechanism in place. So this is what Rav Ashi Ameimar suggests. Amalei Rav Ashi Ameimar, Rav Ashi says, I have a problem with what you're saying. And that's why I specifically took the 2000 to 2023 example. Are you going to say then, let's say, if it all has to go back to the moment of the loan, let's say we're standing in 2023 and you want to give it to someone who's 20 years old. Now that 20-year-old was not alive in the year 2000. So if the whole issue is that there was some sort of acquisition that went on in the beginning, well, that person wasn't in existence in the beginning. And even though, even according to Rabbi Meir, who says that, let's say I want to give you the dates of my palm tree, okay? Let's say they haven't grown yet. Rabbi Meir, some people hold I can't do that. I can't give you any rights to something that doesn't exist yet. But Rabbi Meir holds I can. But Rabbi Meir holds I can give you dates that aren't in existence yet. But I'm giving it to you who you exist in this world. But to a thing, meaning to a being who's not in existence, I can give an object that's not yet grown, but I can't give it to a person who wasn't even in existence at the time. So basically he says you can't go all the way back, because otherwise you're going to distinguish between people who were alive at the time of the loan and people who weren't alive at the time of the loan, and nobody makes that distinction. So he doesn't like his answer, and we'll have to wait to see what Rav Ashi says in tomorrow's daf, how this works. So quick review of the daf. We started with a more elaborate discussion of Rabbi Meir and the rabbis about chavin la'adam shelo b'fanav zachin, right? And the whole issue of the eved, is it chov, is it a zchut, is it good for him, not good for him, having to do with the truma, and then we added the issue of he now can no longer marry, together with a shekhat na'anit, mate with her. Then we moved on to this Mishnah that distinguished between shtar la'achar mita, which you can't give, but gift after death you can give. We have Rav's explanation of the Mishnah only if the money's piled up in the room, in the corner of the room or something. And then we had to explain Rav, and we explained, is he talking about a bari, a healthy person, or is he talking about a sick person, someone who's about to die? And we saw the two sides there and why each one doesn't hold like the other. And within that, we mentioned the statement of Rav about mana li biyadcha, give to someone else, ma'at shlosh tam works. And now we're going into that. Does it work also for a loan, or only for a pikadon, for some sort of object that you actually gave me to watch, but not necessarily for a loan? We said, oh, it does work for a loan according to Rav, but now we have to figure out how it works. Ameimar suggested something, but we reject. A quick review of today's daf. Wishing everybody a great day.